Corpus Christi, or as it's properly called, the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ, is a feast which only came into our church in the 12th or 13th century, which seems like a long time ago, but really it's 13 or 12 or 1300 years after Jesus. It came into existence because the people began to preach in the church against the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. This is my body, this is my blood, was only figurative language. It was only symbolic. It wasn't real. And so there was a great flurry of activity in the church to restore the teaching where it had fallen away about the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Many of the things that we grew up with, at least my generation grew up with, began at that time. Processions with the Blessed Sacrament, exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, benediction with the Blessed Sacrament, making visits to the Blessed Eucharist in the parish church. And they were all good things. But there is a danger if we concentrate on those Eucharistic devotions that we miss the point. And the point was driven home in the second reading today. Jesus gave us the bread of the Eucharist and the wine of the Eucharist to be eaten and drunk. We were to consume Him in the bread and the wine of the Eucharist, not view Him, but consume Him. Eating is absolutely necessary for survival. We eat to stay alive. I never think of staying alive when I eat. I either enjoy the meal or I don't. I like a good meal, and I'm sure I'm like everybody else. But the purpose of food is to keep us alive. Without eating, we die. Jesus gave us Himself as food to keep us alive, to keep Himself alive in us, because we are, as St. Paul said, the body of Christ. The body of Christ needs to stay alive and active in the world, or the presence of Christ won't be in the world. And that responsibility is Christ, but He does it through us, who are His disciples. He acts through us. He speaks through us. He makes God, His Father, present through us. Now, you can keep a body alive intravenously in a comatose state, and the life of Christ can fall into a comatose state if we, His disciples, are not careful to be aware that what our eating is calling us to do. Food is not just to stay alive, but to act, to react, to do things. And we are fed to keep the presence of Christ alive in our world today. So He can do exactly today what He did in His own time. He accepted people, whoever they were. He healed people whenever they were sick. He forgave people whenever they were sinful. He even raised them from the dead. We cannot fall into a comatose state as His disciples, or the presence of Christ will become diminished in our world, which in some ways it already has happened. So the Feast of the Eucharist, the Feast of the Blessed Sacrament, is a reminder to us that we go to Holy Communion in order to keep the life of Christ alive in us for a purpose. And the purposes of our eating the Eucharist are the same purposes that Jesus had when He came among us from the Father, to raise us up, to heal us, to console us, to give us all the things that we had lost or lacked. And that's what Christian life is all about. We cannot afford to keep Christ in a comatose state because we are not responding to the gift of the Eucharist by letting His life burgeon in us and grow in us, just as our natural life did from the first moment of our conception. The Eucharist calls us to life and to activity.